Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitor is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 750 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance program, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. Some of the stories Jay and I consider this week are the continued commentary from the Walmart FCPA settlement. We have a new FCPA settlement in the TechnipFMC case. Dylan Toker writes a couple of great articles on the fallout from the Walmart settlement, including pre-settlement expenditures and waiver of attorney-client privilege. The Department of Justice gets a conviction in the Boston FCPA sting case involving Haiti. Mike Lynch took the stand in the HP autonomy civil litigation in the United Kingdom and excoriated Meg Whitman. We took a look at an internal controls failure at the Sacramento Kings. What is the state of cybersecurity in 2019? The EU Whistleblower Initiative, and can regulators leverage monitors? We discuss my 5-part podcast series with Terry Orr, Managing Director of Kroll, on the current state of compliance. Celebrate the addition of a new podcast to the Compliance Podcast Network, The Integrity Factor, and a new ebook that I wrote and has been published by Hanzo. This Week in FCPA is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and now a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back with Mr. Monitors, Jay Rosen, for another episode of This Week in FCPA. This week, it's episode 160 for the week ending June 28th, 2019, the halfway to the holidays edition. Yes, for those of you worried about holiday shopping, we are halfway to the holiday season. I think that means there are about 20 Fridays left before the holidays are here. So get out there and start shopping. So Jay, you are in a remote location today. You want to tell us where you're at?
Yeah, I'm not too far away from the moons of Endor. I'm coming to you from the top of the parking structure at Disneyland in California Adventure.
So is that commitment or what, ladies and gentlemen?
Sure. This week we have another settlement. TechnipFMC pays $296 million to settle FCPA offenses. The oil and gas company, which is headquartered in London, agreed on Tuesday to pay criminal penalties of $296 million to resolve violations of the FCPA. The DOJ assessed total criminal penalties of $296, and it's against TechnipFMC and its U.S. subsidiary. About $214 million of the total penalties would go to enforcement authorities in Brazil. The remaining portion, $81.9 million, stays here in the U.S. The company entered into a 3-year deferred prosecution agreement with the DOJ. The DPA charged the company with 2 counts of conspiracy to violate the anti-bribery provisions of the FCPA. The DPA did not require the company to appoint an independent monitor. The company says it also had reached an agreement in principle with the SEC, subject to final approval. As of taping this morning, we do not have any more information on that. And it was a group effort. Once again, the DOJ said the governments of Australia, Brazil, France, Italy, Monaco, and the United Kingdom all helped. So if the name sounds familiar to you, it's a recidivist. This has come around once before, but from what the government has said and reporting, which we link to from both the FCPA blog and from our colleague Dylan Toker, who's now at the Wall Street Journal. So, Tom, anything to add on TechnipFMC?
So a couple of interesting notes, one of which you highlighted, Jay, which is Technip is a recidivist, 2-time loser under the FCPA. Second of all, this is the first time we've ever had a merger where both merger partners were under investigation at the time of the merger. So Technip merged with FMC, I believe, in January of 2018. And at the time, they were both under investigation. So we have the anomaly of two separate FCPA violations from two former companies who are now one company, and that company is TechnipFMC. So kudos to both Technip and FMC for their work to garner the enforcement action result that they did. They both have worked very hard in terms of remediation of their compliance program. So, and they did not require a monitor. So unlike Walmart the week before, they did not require a monitor. So that really leads into the next segment, Jay, where the Walmart commentary continued this week. I wrote a 4-part series on it. Mike Volkov had a 3-part series. Other commentators also commented on the case. Matt Kelly said it's the end of an era with this prosecution and waved goodbye to it as he did the Game of Thrones. I'm not sure I agree that it's the end of an era, but interesting commentary from Matt and always his fascinating angles on things. So lots of good lessons learned from Walmart, I think. And Dylan Topar wrote, I guess maybe that will lead into segment 3 that you can explore a little bit. He wrote a couple of very interesting articles in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal about Walmart. Frankly, I thought he hit them out of the park. You want to tell our listeners about them?
Yeah, this is something entitled "Analysis: Walmart's Spend and Tell Strategy Paid Off for its bribery settlement." Quarter after quarter, the figure grew. By the time Walmart Inc. reached a long-awaited settlement with the U.S. authorities last week, the company had amassed more than $900 million in cost from compliance enhancements and internal investigations into the bribery law violations in Mexico, Brazil, China, and India. So government officials in late 2016 had sought $1 billion from the company, but after several years of negotiation, Walmart ultimately reduced that figure down to $282 million. And what seems to have been a big factor, according to Dylan, is that very soon after, in 2013, after the investigation had started, the company started breaking out its expenditures on a quarterly basis, saying how much money was spent on investigation and how much was spent on remediation in the compliance program. And the majority of the $900 million that Walmart paid in legal costs was not spent directly on compliance. The retailer spent about $509 million on investigations, chiefly through the law firm of Jones Day. So basically, Dylan's point is that Walmart really became aggressive about the amount of money it was spending on both the investigation and the remediation, consistently reminding the government of that. And to the points that you raised earlier, Tom, I think that led them to the very successful outcome. And the only thing that, kept it from being a complete win was that they still need to bring on a monitor for a couple years. But even that, I think they come out well because they really have a very limited scope of what the monitor needs to look at.
So, Jay, if I could just add, the thing that really struck me about the entire Walmart spend, and Dylan, I think, rightly points out the PR campaign that Walmart utilized on their spend, but $900 million is still $900 million, and when you tack on the fine and penalty, we're talking nearly $1.2 billion. So the pre-settlement costs are over 3 times the amount of the fine and penalty. That doesn't even begin to take into account the lost time, loss of stock price, loss of share price, and other damage to the company, and what it's going to mean for the company going forward in terms of loss of business, in addition to additional scrutinies that governments will put on them, particularly local governments. So the cost was real, and by publicizing that number, I hope compliance practitioners can utilize this when they talk to their board of directors and they talk to their senior management. There are real costs to these kinds of cases. Obviously, the world's largest retailer is going to have a very high cost, but if you're doing business across the globe, you could easily get caught in and have to do a investigation such as Walmart did. And if you're not Walmart, the cost can be devastating to you. Jay, if I could just add an article that was posted by Dylan Tokar on the Risk and Compliance Journal after we prepared our show notes. And I'm going to link to it as an addendum. He wrote an article about the privilege dispute that Walmart got into with the government. And I think this is very instructive reading. There was Walmart voluntarily allowed 18 current and former employees to be interviewed by the government, agreeing that their statements, wasn't testimony, would not constitute a waiver of the attorney-client privilege. When the Justice Department thereafter tried to subpoena a former general counsel of Walmart to testify about statements made during a voluntary interview, the company balked at that and defended or tried to have it quashed under the attorney-client privilege. The Court of Appeals held that in Walmart's favor. So, and I think that was probably the correct legal ruling because there was no voluntary waiver. But it has led the government to stop handing out these non-waiver agreements. And what that will mean in terms of cooperation credit for the government going forward is an open question. The government can't negatively charge companies or not credit them if they stand on the attorney-client privilege, but that could be a serious lack of cooperation. We fought that battle literally 20 years ago, or now almost 20 years ago, at least in the first part of the decade, around Enron and Dynegy in Houston. And so the attempts by the government to get companies to waive the attorney-client privilege was met with a very strong pushback from the ABA and business groups. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But I just wanted to shout out to Dylan. These are his first two articles, and frankly, I think he hit them out of the park on both ones. So I'm really interested and excited to see what else he's going to come up with going forward.
Definitely. So, Tom, we're turning our attention to London now. Mike Lynch takes the stand and says that Meg Whitman wasn't up to the job. What are we talking about here?
There is a fascinating trial civil litigation going on in London right now where Hewlett-Packard is suing Mike Lynch and others from its former acquired company Autonomy, claiming that Autonomy defrauded HP by selling itself to HP. And as anomalous as that may sound, the CFO of of Autonomy was criminally convicted in the United States over allegations. But this is not in the United States, it's in Britain. And Mike Lynch, the former CEO of Autonomy, is starting a 22-day testimony run. And I think it's going to be fascinating. It started off really out of the box where he blamed the incoming head of HP, one Meg Whitman, you may have heard of her, who he said could not cope with all the fires burning at HP after she took over from the previous CEO, Leo Apotheker, who was the main architect behind the plan to acquire HP. But he was ousted after shareholders revolted over this strategy and HP's plummeting share price. I followed this case fairly extensively, and internally at HP, it was recognized that it would be the potential for a disaster, which of course it was, after HP paid $11 billion for Autonomy and then 18 months later wrote off $8.8 billion of the deal. And for HP to claim it was hoodwinked and that kind of transaction seems to me to be a pretty strong claim. Nevertheless, the trial's going on. It's going to be interesting to see what will happen in London. I can't believe a British jury would uphold a U.S. company's claiming that a British company hoodwinked them. But Mike Lynch is under criminal indictment in the United States, so we could have the anomaly of he wins on a civil suit in London and he loses in a criminal case in the United States. What that does for our relations with the United Kingdom is an open question. But he came out of the gate blasting HP for not only not integrating, but its overall conduct going forward.
So next up, coming to us from the DOJ this past Thursday, June 20th, 2 businessmen convicted of international bribery offenses. And this is back to the mothership in Boston. A federal jury in Boston found that the chairman and CEO of an investment firm and a member of the investment firm's board of directors were guilty for their participation in a scheme to bribe officials of the Republic of Haiti in exchange for business and advantages for the investment firm. We've been tracking this story for a couple of years. Roger Richard Bonsi, 74, a dual U.S. and Haitian citizen who resides in Madrid, Spain, and Joseph Batiste, 66, of Fulton, Maryland, were found guilty after a 2-week trial. Basically, these 2 gentlemen conspired to pay millions of dollars in bribes to Haitian officials to do business there. Today's guilty verdict sends a strong message to those who use corrupt means to obtain unfair and illegal business advantages that they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent possible by the DOJ. This was one of those undercover situations where FBI agents posed as potential investors in connection with the development of a port and a concrete factory in Haiti. So was there some scuttlebutt earlier last week, Tom, about the government not having their evidence in order, or am I mixing this up?
Nope. This was the case. The FBI was actually skewered because they lost a large number of audio tapes of recordings of undercover operatives in this sting case. And then the recordings they had apparently were such poor quality that you couldn't tell really what was on them. But nevertheless, a big win for the government after the gun sting case. This is a pretty significant win. It's the first FCPA sting case since the gun sting debacle.
So it wouldn't be this week in the FCPA without us hearing from the coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly. What is Matt's talking about with regard to an internal control airball in Sacramento?
So in addition to absolutely being the coolest guy and continue to actually get cooler, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. And comparing the Walmart settlement to the end of the Game of Thrones, he took a look at a huge internal control failure at the Sacramento Kings. I would say they're the laughingstock of the NBA, but can't really say that when James Dolan is involved in anything, the owner of the Knicks. But the former chief revenue officer for Sacramento was sentenced to 7 years in prison for duping some of California's largest businesses into wiring over $13 million to bank accounts of shell companies he secretly controlled so he could purloin the money. He worked as Jeffrey David worked as the King's top sales executive from 2011 to 2018. Before that, had been VP of corporate partnership since 2006. And he used this as a way to convince companies who had purchased naming rights for the Sacramento arena, new Sacramento arena that they conned the people of Sacramento into paying for, the companies had long-term payouts, and he offered them substantial discounts if they would pay for the naming rights in a lump sum. So he got Golden Credit One and one other company, Kaiser Permanente, to pay large sums to his companies. His company was called Sacramento Sports Partners, and apparently they did no due diligence, or little or no due diligence, because they got an invoice which was signed on King's letterhead and forged King's executive signature. And then David took it a step further where he forged signatures of Golden One and Kaiser executives to get the wire payments processed into his accounts. It really shows the need, Jay, for not only robust controls, because I believe the controls were in place. You didn't really have control override, but you had just fraud. And We talk about two-step authentication on password changing and password protection. Perhaps companies are going to have to go to two-step authentication for payment of invoices. I recognize could be quite a step. Nevertheless, when you have this amount of money, perhaps companies need to take a step further. But a really interesting article from Matt. Once again, not only is the coolest guy in compliance, but he's getting cooler by the day.
So next up, we have an article from one of our resources that we usually cover each week, Jonathan Rush and his dipping through geometries. In this article, he takes a look at the Australian telecommunications company Telstra, which recently released its security report for 2019. The white paper drew on interviews with 1,298 security professionals, 61% from Asia Pacific, 39% in Europe. And here are some of the highlights of the report. In the past 12 months, there has been a material shift in the priorities of both defenders and attackers. Data breaches, as defined as incidents that result in the confirmed disclosure of sensitive data to unauthorized parties, are on the rise. In particular, 63% of global respondents and 65% of those in Australia reported that their businesses were interrupted due to security breaches or phishing. Other issues that have been pointed out are ransomware attacks and ransom payments. And finally, that there's been more success with data retrieval. The report also commented that while ransomware is still pervasive and profitable for cyber criminals, most potential victims have adopted policies and safeguards. The key message from the report, in the words of Group Executive Michael Ebeld, is that security has moved far beyond the maintenance of firewalls and is now a whole of business concern for C-level executives. So sounds like it's pretty much online with what we're hearing out here, but it's good to have that information summarized and in one place. Next up, Tom, we're going to take a look at an EU whistleblower initiative and wondering how that exactly enhances corporate culture.
So, Jay, the EU recently approved an enhanced and unified whistleblower protection across the EU member states. It's a directive which will go into force and requiring companies of a certain size to establish well-designed whistleblower procedures and grants dramatically extended protection to whistleblowers, including the right to bypass internal channels and go directly to government regulators and receive anti-retaliation protection. In other words, whistleblowers are now protected if they choose to alert authorities directly with no obligation to report internally. That's the rule, or that will be the directive. But what I found equally interesting was the author, Pauline Blondet, gave some tips on what companies need to do to establish a culture of trust. And these are things that I think every CCO and compliance practitioner needs to take a look at and see if this is if you can answer these questions about your company. And I'd like to just run through them. Be clear about your commitment to integrity and practice an active open door policy. 2, be transparent about the reporting and investigative process. 3, effectively sanction wrongdoings. 4, communicate the fact that wrongdoings are systematically sanctioned. And 5, actively incentivize good behavior. So I was really struck by how those could be used, not simply for a whistleblower, but really for an entire company to build a culture of ethics, a culture of compliance, and most importantly, a culture of trust. I know that's something that you and your AMI colleagues talk about quite a bit, but this really gives compliance officers a way to think through that and really a way to self-assess where their culture might be before they call AMI to come in.
How can regulators leverage monitors? And while most compliance practitioners are aware of the roles that monitors play in FCPA enforcement, there are also other uses for independent monitors and are much broader than simply in the criminal or civil enforcement actions. Federal agencies use monitors for a wide variety of roles to ensure compliance with agreements. At its most basic level, an independent monitor is a way for the government to extend its reach, both in terms of lengthening out the time of true government oversight and through many techniques that we've discussed in the past. Different situations that I look at in the blog are most recently the FCC used an independent monitor and the merger between AT&T and DirecTV to ensure compliance with certain merger conditions. We've also seen this come up in the area of monitoring hospital conversions when you have a for-profit and a nonprofit hospital merging. And finally, they can also be used in non-regulatory areas. So the bottom line is that independent monitors can come in and look at the system of controls in a wide variety of regulatory and legal arenas. You don't have to do this all the time, but it's something you may need to do, not even on every year, but once in a while. And it's a good practice to have somebody come in, take a look at how your company is doing, and then report back. It's money well spent because you can have established that the organization being reviewed has a good program, and if you need to fine-tune your program in certain ways, you now have a roadmap to follow. So that is, as I said, my continuing series that's on CCI. Tom, you've had a 5-part series this week where you took a look at compliance with Terry Orr of Kroll. What were some of the subjects you addressed?
So, Jay, we took a look at the current state of compliance through Terry's eyes, and he is not a lawyer. He's a forensic auditor, CPA type, and it was really a fascinating journey. We took a look at some recent enforcement actions, the new DOJ guidance, and then really 2 areas that I think are ripe for exploration, which Terry's been thinking about quite a bit. The first was private equity and compliance, and then the second was new challenges in healthcare. And there he focused on a case out of Dallas, which was started off as a key TAM case, but they used the Travel Act, which occasionally touches the FCPA, to go after doctors and physicians who'd engaged in bribery and corruption around hospitals and where they work. So really good stuff. I think everyone should check it out. And I know the series we put together was really interesting. Jay, I'm extraordinarily pleased to announce a new addition to the Compliance Podcast Network family of podcasts. AP Capaldo and Marcia Weldon have joined on their podcast, The Integrity Factor. And they're going to take a look at compliance from, as they call them, compliance grinders perspective. Marcia just recently concluded the organization of the Miami Law Conference, Compliance Across Borders. AP is a compliance officer who is a millennial, and she's going to bring a millennial's perspective. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with. The premiere was this week. It's on the Compliance Podcast Network. I've linked to it in the show notes. Then I also, Hanzo actually published a book. I collaborated with them on an ebook, the 2019 Guide to Internal Investigations for Compliance, an ebook on planning, protocols, data collection, triage, and remediation. It's a really good resource for the compliance practitioner around internal investigations. It's available for download. It's we've linked to it. It's available at no charge, so check it out and add it to your stable of ebooks. I know you will find it useful.
So I think that that ends up with all the news for the week. We would like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA, episode 160, for the week ending June 28th, 2019, the 6 months to the Hollywood holiday shopping edition. I know Tom is reserving spot at Coach to start looking for his leather goods for the holiday season. So I hope everyone takes the opportunity to start thinking about the holidays. On behalf of the compliance evangelist Tom Fox and myself, Jay Rose, and Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us and wish you an early happy 4th of July.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions, you can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. I'm at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join Jay and I again for another wrap-up of some of the week's top compliance and ethics stories on This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network, now a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks again for listening.